You are listening to Vaccine Voices, an educational series presented by the IPRO QIN-QIO.
Welcome to Vaccine Voices. My name is Melanie Ronda, and I'm a registered nurse, an infection preventionist, and a former director of nursing and long-term care. I'm also the director of Task 1 in 3 of the IPRO QIN-QIO contract. If you are new to Vaccine Voices podcast series, I encourage you to listen to episodes 1 through 6 first. This episode serves as a wrap-up to the series, where I will talk with Jeff Wetherhold, our motivational interviewing trainer, about the series and the concepts that were covered in each of the scenarios we presented. Welcome back, Jeff, and thank you for joining us.
Well, it's great to be here. It's good to see you again, Melanie.
Can we start by sharing a little bit about your background and your interest in motivational interviewing?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. My background is actually in quality improvement in healthcare and educational settings. So I've done that work for a number of years. And over the course of my work, I've really come to appreciate that there are parts of change that we can control and that we can plan for, and parts of every change that we can't, where we need other people to make change that they don't have to. Motivational interviewing is the most helpful skill set that I've found for providing people with tools and skills to address those parts of change that they can't control, to help others move toward change that they would like to see, whether it's a change in their personal life, whether it's a change in terms of buying into something in a professional setting, whether it's something as simple as a reduction in change resistance. Motivational interviewing, in my experience, is a tremendously helpful skill set for both identifying where do I need someone else's help to get to the change I'd like to see, and how can I help them get there on their terms.
Over the last 3 years, we've recognized so many challenges around the topic of vaccines. And I know we talked about how would be the best way to discuss improving vaccine uptake. So how did we determine the scenarios to present in the Vaccine Voices?
The first priority for me was to try to authentically represent the diversity of reasons that people have hesitancy around accepting vaccines. I think often it's easy for us to go straight to the more severe cases of resistance to vaccines. And those deserve some of our attention, and those are represented in 2 of the episodes in this series. But they are by no means the full spectrum of vaccine resistance. I think we do ourselves a great disservice when we allow ourselves to think of vaccine resistance in those terms, and we make it much harder than it needs to be. One of the core principles of motivational interviewing is to acknowledge that we are all ambivalent about change. We have reasons that we want to change, and we have reasons that we don't. And that ambivalence is a spectrum. It never goes away entirely, right? Our goal is not to stamp it out. I'd rather think of it as rebalancing ambivalence. Plenty of people make a decision to accept vaccination or to accept other changes in their lives who still have reservations and who still have concerns. They didn't go away. We either muted them or we made some of their reasons to change more salient and more important to them. And when we introduce that kind of framework, for me, conversations around vaccine acceptance become much more manageable.
Jeff, thank you for pointing out that we tend to go to the severe examples and how important it is to look at all types of scenarios and how we may be able to manage those conversations. How can we approach each conversation with a staff member or resident using motivational interviewing lens to achieve the best outcomes?
I think the first thing that we want to acknowledge is that motivational interviewing is a very broadly applicable and helpful tool set, but it is not for everything. It's not appropriate for every problem. We need to have a specific change or issue in mind in order to use motivational interviewing well. In this case, that's around vaccine acceptance. It can be any number of changes that someone might be willing to consider. The person on the receiving end of a conversation needs to have authentic agency. And that includes the agency to say, no, I'm not going to change. I'm not going to consider change. I'm not even going to listen to you. And it needs to be ethical to influence their decision. We can't approach a conversation from a place of wanting to talk somebody into something that we know is not in their best interest. So once we've identified, okay, this is a conversation where we have a specific change and where the person on the other end of it has agency, it's their decision whether or not to change, then we can use motivational interviewing to very positive effects. And that starts with the mindset that we approach these conversations with. The core values of motivational interviewing are partnership, that we put ourselves on equal footing with the recipient, acceptance, that we take the other person in the conversation as they are and that we be willing to work with them there, compassion, that we express a deliberate commitment to their welfare, not our goals, and empowerment or envisioning, a commitment to helping people maybe see themselves in a way that they didn't before. And that mindset's really helpful. I think we can all reflect on examples of people in our own lives who have shown values of partnership or acceptance or compassion or empowerment to us. And if we can put ourselves in that place, I think we're in a good position to move forward with an effective conversation. I also think it's worth acknowledging, there's some common traps. So we always want to have a goal in mind, but we want to know that that's a shared goal that we've developed with the client who's on the other end of the conversation.
That's a good practice. And I'm thinking when you're talking about having a goal in mind, is it realistic to expect that we will convince everyone to accept the vaccine?
Absolutely not. And I think that runs contrary to the goals and the spirit and the foundations of motivational interviewing. I think one of the first things that motivational interviewing can do for us as practitioners is to help us acknowledge that that's an unrealistic and unfair expectation, both for clients and for us. I have the utmost empathy for professionals who either explicitly or implicitly feel that pressure, who walk into these conversations and feel like that's something that they need to accomplish. That's not a reasonable goal. That's not an attainable or appropriate goal. And that's an incredibly stressful situation for both a practitioner and a client to be in an interviewing environment. We are going to encounter conversations, thankfully, where having someone accept a vaccine who did not accept it before is within our reach. And we've got 2 examples of those in the series where the resistance is more mild. And it's important that we acknowledge and practice how to manage that so that we don't fall into the trap of thinking of all resistance as severe or ideological in nature. In some cases, it will be appropriate, and the client will tell us that.
Thank you. After reviewing the 6 episodes, I learned a lot about motivational interviewing, and I've been a healthcare practitioner for over 30 years. So I ask and question if providers haven't been using this technique in their conversations, what's the first thing a provider could do to become comfortable using motivational interviewing techniques?
Well, if it's a totally new concept to them, I would suggest some resources or some training, right? That they become familiar with the key concepts of motivational interviewing enough to begin to work with those. Beyond that, I think practice and a safe environment in which to practice is absolutely critical. In some cases, that's coaching. In some cases, that can be peer-to-peer with others in their organization. Motivational interviewing is a very flexible and adaptable approach. When I see people use this most effectively, it is when they find a way to use it most authentically. They feel like themselves while they're using it. They don't feel like they're having someone else's conversation. And I truly believe that there is room in this discipline for everyone to find a way to use at least parts of it authentically. When we consider resources that someone who's newer to motivational interviewing might use and learn from, there are a couple of books I would recommend. The first and most obvious is Motivational Interviewing, Helping People Change and Grow. This is the foundational text in motivational interviewing, authored by William Miller and Stephen Rolnick. The 4th edition of this book was just released last year. They are the co-developers of motivational interviewing. For me, this is a source text for much of what I do. There's also a book called Motivational Interviewing for Leaders in the Helping Professions, which I found very helpful in translating some of this into the context of healthcare and community health. And of course, there are lots of good resources out there for training and coaching. At the risk of being self-serving, I would certainly point people toward MI for Health, which is my website where I talk about some of the services that I'm able to provide for clients.
So, Jeff, an area that's really challenging is really learning how to listen. Can you recommend techniques around that?
I can. I want to acknowledge that is a skill that gets built over time, and one where I think it's very important that we show ourselves patience and empathy, some of those qualities that we look for in terms of how we would treat clients. We also need to treat ourselves that way. One of the nice things about motivational interviewing for me is that over time, I've noticed the way it encourages me to speak changes the way I listen, and the way I listen changes the way I speak. So we all, I think, have the shared experience, or at least I have this experience, and I know from our conversation prior that Melanie, you do as well, where we catch ourselves thinking about what we're going to say next instead of listening to what someone is saying. We all do this. Some of us, myself included, do it frequently. I've come to believe this isn't something that we can do away with. This is a natural human impulse. The best that we can do is to short circuit it. And motivational interviewing has helped me do that. And it's done that because when you reframe what you say to a client around what they've offered you, when the goal of what you say is to reflect back what they have said, you have to learn to listen differently. You learn to pick out the pieces that you want to highlight, that you want to flesh out in ways that maybe they weren't able to for whatever reason, where there's emotion that you feel like is worth calling out, and reflect that back. And in time, the way you speak really does change the way you listen, which makes it easier to speak in ways that are consistent with this approach. So it's not a quick fix. I don't think anything regarding changing the way we listen will be. But it is something that I've noticed very powerfully in my own practice, and I know others have as well. And I hope that it is a worthwhile incentive for people to stick with this approach, because it's a big change when it starts to happen, and it's one that continues to pay off in the long term.
Thank you, Jeff, for joining us today. I appreciate your insight and your knowledge around motivational interviewing. And thank you for listening to Vaccine Voices. If you have questions or feedback, please email IPRO Nursing Home Team at ipro.org. The resources that Jeff spoke about will be available on the show notes. Have a good day.